In this video I'm going to give you 7 reasons as to why the Radical SR3 and this class of vehicle should really be the predominant type of vehicle used for online racing and esports. Before I give you those 10 reasons, we first need to have a little bit of a preamble about the despair and the disease that is GT3 cars, and the fact that they have become the predominant race car that's driven online and within the esports space. Now don't get me wrong, I do actually quite like GT3 cars, and I can certainly see the appeal of having a grid with lots of different vehicles all taking place in the same race. I also understand that Lamborghini, Porsche, Ferrari are well-known popular brands, and that certainly gets eyeballs onto a race, regardless of how good the racing actually is in that race. But the fact of the matter is GT3 cars are rather cumbersome vehicles, have quite a lot of assist built onto them, and are fundamentally designed more for endurance racing or for giving rich people a lot of track time than they are for determining which driver has the best racecraft skills and which drivers are the best at balancing a vehicle at the limit. The Radical SR3 really is a contrast to that. Well, aside from allowing wealthy people to get lots of track time, the Radical actually does a really good job of that. So the first reason as to why a Radical SR3 produces such fantastic racing is that it's a small car. Now this might not sound like a major thing, but the larger the vehicle is, the harder it is to actually get overtaking opportunities on a racetrack. The smaller the car, effectively the wider the track becomes. Now larger vehicles might not be too much of a problem on really big circuits, maybe designed for Formula 1, Silverstone, Spa, you know, those major FIA top tier tracks. But on smaller circuits, Alton Park, Brands Hatch, Road Atlanta, really you start to get big problems when it comes to larger vehicles, even stuff like Formula 1, but GT3 cars, just larger vehicles really reduce the overtaking opportunities. And you'll also find with smaller cars you're way more likely to get 3 wide situations, and in some cases 4 wide situations, which are much rarer to occur with larger vehicles. Maybe at the start of the race, but you know, not throughout the entirety of the race. Additionally, if a car is not as long, it's easier to then complete a pass, so you don't need as much of a run up or as much momentum or to outbrake the car in front of you as much as you do with a longer car. So a smaller vehicle really has a huge effect on producing lots of racecraft and overtake opportunities. Smaller is better, I tell all the women in my life. They don't believe me. Another huge aspect of the Radical SR3 in this class of vehicle is that they have very controllable slip. Now part of this component does also apply to many other vehicles, and generally also applies to simulators that have realistic tyres at the limit. Unfortunately, some of the most popular esports simulators do not have realistic tyre behaviour at the limit whatsoever. That's another video though, so we're not going to go into that for now, but fortunately Assetto Corsa does have really good tyre behaviour at the limit, and a Radical SR3 with its downforce and also the fact that it's such a light vehicle relative to its downforce gets you really nice controllable slip, which means you can again be much more aggressive with your maneuvers when trying to complete an overtake, and it also opens up different lines through a corner. I'm sure there's a philosophical debate as to if there's one ultimate line through any corner. There probably is just one, or very close to one ultimate line. But when you've got a car that has a good amount of controllable slip, assuming that you're side by side or three wide or just going through the corner at a different angle, that controllable slip means that the different lines are at least somewhat viable, and in a particular situation the line could end up getting you ahead of a car that you're trying to pass, and that controllable slip is really vital to that. And it also means that the racing action and the driver that ends out coming up in front is the one that has a better mastery of the car balancing and car control at the limit, as opposed to necessarily a driver that has just rote memorized the hot lap line. So that controllable slip is vitally important, I think, for really good dynamic racecraft and racing action. Number 3 is that the Radical SR3 is a really nice pace, in that it's not so slow that an experienced driver will die of boredom just trying to navigate the track, especially on larger circuits, but it's also not so fast that a new sim racer coming into it, or a lower ranked sim racer getting into it, will just find it impossible to get to grips with. It's at that pace where I think it really does manage to accommodate all types of racer. That might seem like a small thing, but I actually think that is a really major component of if a car is going to be good for a wider audience getting into esports, or starting out with esports, or starting out with online racing. This is bang smack in the middle of speed, I think, for everyone to enjoy. Number 4 is that the Radicals actually have quite a lot of draft, which acts as a catch-up effectively. Crucially, what it does is it reduces the hot lap rote memorization component of sim racing that gets worse and worse as you get to the top echelons of sim racing. Now, obviously, that super precise, super rote memorization aspect of driving is always going to come into play. I think it's actually really impressive what the top alien sim racers do and how consistent they are. But reducing that with draft will again bunch the grid up and make it much more likely that you're going to get close racing and open up opportunities for defending, attacking, and more racecraft. Obviously, I think there's always a fine balance with draft. It can be annoying if you've got the pace and then someone just catches you and, you know, they didn't require any skill. But I think the Radicals actually are again in the sweet spot for draft, where there's quite a lot, but there's not so much that, you know, people just breeze past you down any straight. It varies from simulator to simulator as to how much that is, and I think actually on an esports side you could just design that into it. You probably don't even necessarily need to have it be realistic. You would just set the draft to be whatever would make the most sense for esports racing. But that component I think is really nice for, again, laser focusing things onto racing action. Number 5 is that the Radical, largely due to its high downforce and the fact that it's not heavy, is a vehicle that doesn't get stuck into long, drawn-out, ridiculous slides, and is also a vehicle that's highly responsive to driver input, be that their steering input, their braking input, or their throttle input. It's very much a really hooked-up vehicle. With a lot of the more popular cars that we currently see racing, and this is definitely an issue with many of the GT3 cars, they are so heavy and cumbersome. Add on to that some of the systems, the traction control and the ABS. Again, they're just so cumbersome relative to Radicals or F4, you know, lighter classes of vehicle, that you are literally taking away the component of driving that distinguishes one driver over another driver. You're sort of lowering the skill ceiling, if it were, when you've got a vehicle that's less responsive. One of the worst aspects of heavier vehicles or less responsive vehicles is that it does magnify the hot lap component of sim racing. Your initial corner entry is going to become more and more the defining component of the drive, as opposed to your balancing of the vehicle. You're adapting to the current exact situation. Obviously, and I've got to say this because someone will nitpick it in the comments if I don't, obviously your entry into the corner is always going to be probably one of the most important components of driving any car, but there's going to be degrees to where that is the most defining aspect of if you end up being the more successful driver of a given car in a specific race. The more you have dynamic control of the vehicle going into the corner, mid-corner, and on the corner exit, the more opportunity there is to modulate the throttle, modulate the brake, balance a bit of slip, potentially balance that whilst not driving the optimal line because you're off the line due to racing someone else. The more a vehicle allows you that driver agency, the more you will start to see the drivers that have actual car control skill stand out over drivers that have pure memorization skill. I don't know about you, I like watching Michael Schumacher style driving, not robot auto driving. Though it is impressive. Again, aliens, especially in sims that don't allow much control at the limit, it blows my mind. It's like watching a really good pianist. Be careful with that word. It's like watching, you know, that kind of a performance. It's still impressive, but that dynamic balancing, I think, opens up more opportunities, more racecraft. It's more exciting. You all agree with me. We don't need to say any more on that subject. If you disagree, you're a pianist. Of course, as well, actually, that ability to quickly nook the car left and right and throw them a bit of a dummy, again, is going to open up so much more opportunities for overtaking moves. Whereas if you're driving a cross-channel ferry, you can't nook it left or right because that's already off. That's already thrown the tyres off, and the car in front knows that you can't move it left and right or before this amount of time before the corner. So they know that they just need to hug the inside line, or the, you know, there's a very obvious way to defend it. So that response and the lightness of the vehicle combined with downforces is absolutely crucial. You're pianist. And finally, 6. They're just really nice cars. I mean, come on. A Radical is one of the nicest looking vehicles out there. You can't argue with that. Part of its looks, though, does mean that you actually have really good visibility from the cockpit. You're low to the ground, so it also feels nice and fast. You can see the wheel arches, so you can see where you're positioning the car. Not quite as good as a Formula car, but still pretty close. Absolutely top-tier vehicle. Radical. As a bonus, I'd also say that the setup options aren't too crazy, despite it being a downforce vehicle. So, what more could you want? There you go, guys. That is why the Radical should replace GT3 racing, and why it should be used as the primary esports car, or at least it should be one of the more popular cars for ranked online racing. Maybe if you had an online service with the subscription model and you included the car for free, then it would be very popular. But then you could replace that car that's popular with a paid version of the car that's worse and force everyone to drive the worst car, killing the series. That would be stupid, and you'd have to be a moronic company to do that. That would not happen within sim racing. Anyway, let's hope that we see more Radicals racing in esports and in online competitions and events, because they're glorious. They're never going to defeat the disease of GT3, but I can dream. I really appreciate you guys watching this video. Those of you that got to the end of it, congratulations. It's not a good thing that you've done. Till the next one, happy tea drinking, take care, and goodbye everyone.